There's a moment many successful people eventually reach when the role that built their success no longer feels like who they really are. From the outside, everything looks successful. The career works, the reputation is strong, and the results are still there. But internally, something feels different. And the question that begins to surface is this: why does the life that worked suddenly feel so misaligned? Welcome back to your Passion, Purpose, and Personal Brand. I'm Lisa McGuire, Strategic Identity Advisor and creator of the category of Only. It's where I guide experienced professionals to recognize the authority they've built over a lifetime and turn it into the next chapter of their career or business. Over the next several episodes, we're exploring a moment many successful people eventually reach, when the identity that built their success no longer feels completely aligned with who they're becoming. In the last episode, we talked about truth, the moment where the role that once fit begins to feel like a performance. Today, we're going to talk about what that moment actually is, because after working with leaders, founders, executives, and entrepreneurs for many years, I began noticing a pattern, a moment that shows up again and again in successful careers. And eventually, I realized that moment needed a name. I call it successfully stuck. Successfully stuck is the stage where the life that once worked no longer feels completely true. From the outside, everything still looks successful, but internally, something feels misaligned. Not because you failed, not because you lacked capability, but because the identity that built your success has reached its limit. This moment can feel confusing, because most of the signals we've been trained to watch for still look really good. You're still respected, you're still producing results, and you are still capable. But something subtle has shifted. The strategies that once felt energizing begin to feel mechanical. The conversations you're having start sounding a bit rehearsed. And the role that once fit you perfectly begins to feel like a suit that doesn't quite do it anymore. That moment is what I call successfully stuck. But before we go further, I want to share something with you. Today's episode is sponsored by the methodology that I created called the category of Only. Over the years, I've worked with many high-achieving professionals who reach exactly this moment. From the outside, their lives still look successful, but internally, something has shifted. The identity that once defined them no longer reflects the person they are becoming. Category of Only is the process I use to help people recognize that the authority they've built over a lifetime can now be turned into the next chapter of their career or business. We'll come back to that later in the episode, but first, let's talk about why successfully stuck happens in the first place. Most people build their success through what I call achiever identity. The achiever identity is very powerful. It's built on things like responsibility, performance, achievement, expectations, and external validation. It's the identity that learns how the game works. You learn what success looks like. You learn what gets rewarded. And you learn how to meet those expectations from everyone around you. And if you are good at that game, which many successful people are, you can build an incredible life, a strong career, a reputation, influence in so many spaces, and financial stability. And the achiever identity is not wrong. In fact, it's the identity that builds the life. But here's the part many people don't realize. The identity that built the life is not always the identity that leads the next chapter. And at a certain point, something inside of you begins noticing a difference. There's a moment when success stops feeling aligned. That achiever identity is designed to perform well inside existing structures. But eventually, something begins to shift. The role still works, but it no longer feels like the full truth of who you really are. You might notice things like this. You're less motivated by competition. You start questioning the work that once excited you. You feel drawn to conversations that feel bigger than your job description. You start asking deeper questions like, is this really the work I want to be known for? Is this the impact I want to have? Is this the identity I've actually aligned with who I am now? And this is a moment where many successful people become confused because they assume something must be wrong. They think things like, maybe I'm burned out. Maybe I just need a vacation. Maybe I need to work a little harder. But the truth is often something very different. You're not burned out and you're not failing. You are evolving. And that evolution creates the experience of being successfully stuck. The reason this moment feels so uncomfortable is because two identities begin overlapping. The identity that built your success is still operating, but another identity is beginning to emerge. It's when those two identities overlap that clarity begins to disappear. You feel pulled between who you've always been known as and who you are becoming. And that tension is what we're going to talk about in the next episode, because there's actually a name for that phase too. And I call it the identity eclipse. But before we get there, I want to pause for a moment and ask you something. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Ask yourself this question. Where in my life does everything still look successful, but something no longer feels completely true? It's not wrong, and it's not broken. It's just misaligned. Maybe it's a role that you play. Maybe it's the type of work you've been doing. Maybe it's the way you've been defining your value. Just notice where that feeling appears, because recognizing that moment is incredibly important. It's the signal that something new is trying to emerge. If something in this conversation resonated with you, there's a good chance you may be standing in this moment. The moment when the identity that built your success no longer feels like the identity meant to lead you into the next chapter. And that's exactly the moment where the work I do begins. Through Category of Only, I help leaders and experts recognize the authority that they spent their whole lifetime building and take and turn it into the next chapter of their career or their business. And if you're curious about what your category of only might be, you can learn more about it in the show notes. I'd love to help you see the patterns that you may not yet see in yourself. So next week, in the next episode, we're going to talk about something that I call the identity eclipse. It's the phase where the identity that built your life and the identity that's emerging begin to overlap. And when that happens, clarity temporarily disappears. That phase, understanding that phase, can completely change how you interpret what's happening into your life. And so next time, until then, stay true to who you're becoming. Notice what's coming up for you and lean into that next version of you, your legendary self calling you forward. Thanks so much for being with me today. I'll see you here next week.